Today, I'm outlining the mitigation portion of our plan and the steps we are taking as a government to protect our workers and see them through the crisis, come hell or high water.
They have not passed a single law to make us more self-reliant. Why? Because they closed Parliament.
And that's why I'm calling for that, so that we can have no question about whether or not the actions necessary to support workers will actually happen. So let's have Parliament recalled.
So that was today's announcement of an aid package for workers and businesses affected by the trade war and the lukewarm reception from opposition leaders. Now, the government announced a $6.5 billion package that includes mainly loans plus more flexibility to the employment insurance work-sharing program. The Liberal government says they are tried and tested tools, but will they work? Let's bring in our front bench. Sabrina Grover was a federal Liberal leader, not a leadership candidate. Wow, that would have been news to you, wouldn't it have been, Sabrina? She was a Liberal candidate in 2021 election. So, I mean, I know that's what we're going to talk about later, but anyway, she's now senior advisor at Spark Advocacy and North Star Public Affairs. Thank you, Sabrina. Gary Keller joins me in studio. He is vice president at Strategy Corp, who held key roles in the Conservative government of Stephen Harper, and former Ontario NDP MPP Gurdatin Singh. He's now vice president at Crestview Strategy. He's also the brother of federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Sabrina, not the leader, not running for leader either. I'm going to start with you on this one. The government had to do something, and we know that they were going to put something out there for workers and businesses. Do you think this is enough at this time?
I think because it's so evolving with the United States and with our own provincial and territorial responses, that we're going to have to do it in phases. And so I think this is a good first step for the government. I think it's important that they got support on the table right away. And I think it's important that they demonstrate that they are there for Canadians. You've also seen provincial governments like Wab Kinew and Doug Ford say similar things about support that they're going to offer to workers and to small businesses. I think that at the very start of this process, we have to get something on the table. We have to make sure that it starts working, and then we have to evaluate and reevaluate the impacts of the tariffs and see how that affects businesses and workers and where more or additional funds is needed, right? And I think it's going to really be sector dependent. Things like agriculture and steel could be more highly affected versus you've got technology companies or finance companies that are going to have a different effect. And so being really sector specific on this is going to be important, and watching how the provinces respond. Doug Ford has committed to a 25% tariff on electricity starting on Monday, but we haven't seen a reciprocal tariff coming out from Danielle Smith. So energy workers in Alberta could be harder hit than those in Ontario. And so not putting too much on the table right away, I think, is important.
Gary, do you think that because this is such an unprecedented time and an issue that, we've never faced blanket 25% tariffs from our closest trading partner, do you think that they should have been ready for this, or can you cut them a little slack in saying, okay, look, this is a good step one, we'll see what comes and whether or not these are actually going to land as tariffs on April 2nd?
Well, I have to assume that they've been thinking about and doing some of this work, but the question about is the size of the package. The reason why the package isn't bigger is because Parliament isn't sitting, and the end of the fiscal year is coming up on March 31st, and we may have an election in that interim period, and they're not going to have the money to do more with it. So that's the real reason, and I think it leads credence to those who say, well, maybe Parliament should be sitting right now, we could be debating these issues, we could be voting extra funds to deal with these sorts of things. But look, yes, the government had to do something. Its initial first step. We'll see how complicated it is to get that money out the door. I think back to the steel and aluminum tariffs back in 2018, 2019, and the government said, we're going to be there for you companies. But it took 9 months to stand up the programs, get the money out the door. And in the meantime, some of the companies just said, we can't afford it. We're just going to move our business south of the border, or we're going to find other ways to do this. But we can't wait for 9 months. The government of Canada and the bureaucracy and the political side, speed is not the Liberals' first gear here. Yeah. And I am concerned about the ability for the government to actually get these dollars out the door.
Although, during the COVID-19 pandemic, they did prove that they can get something up quickly and money out the door quickly.
If it was very limited to just CERB and using the tax rolls to do that. But when you have sector specific, the track record has been kind of slow and behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, and Gurdatin, I know that the NDP has been calling for something like this. Do you think it meets the moment, and how concerned are you, to Gary's point, about the speed at which it can get out the door?
it does not meet the moment at all. And actually, if you look at the juxtaposition of how these messages were communicated today, you had the Liberal ministers on their own say these messages, and on the other side, you have the leader of the federal NDP standing with Labour leaders across the board, from the CLC to HU to even progressive think tanks and others, beside him as he presented what real supports for workers should be, which have been articulated in a plan for a while now: the Build Canadian, Buy Canadian, the support for unionized workers, the support for union workers, and to ensure that we're making those investments to protect, a vital aspect of our workforce. So I think the juxtaposition is clear there. This is not doing enough. And I think it's just demonstrating that, once again, we can't really trust or rely on the Liberals to provide the strong opposition to Trump and his policies at this time right now. We're seeing it from the provinces, but we're not seeing enough. Like, Trump is a bully. You need to stand up to bullies. And you see that with the NDP also when they call to say we should not invite Trump to the G7 and we should invite Mr. Zelensky instead. These are the tactics that are proving that Trump responds to, and we need to be bold and strong in our response to Trump on all levels.
To that point, Sabrina, how do you think Canada should now move forward with this? I mean, we're going to have a change in leadership over the weekend, and really it's going to be up to someone else to continue to sort of push back, especially as the goalposts continue to shift. So how do you think that the Liberals really need to sort of frame this going forward with this aid package sitting there, but really considering what they need to do to make sure that April 2nd is not another deadline that just continues to get pushed off?
Well, I think really one of the things that is at the heart of this is being able to understand Donald Trump's motivations and being able to respond to them from a communications and messaging standpoint, right? I saw a headline today that said that the U.S. is making more seizures of illegal eggs than fentanyl at the Canada and Mexico borders. I think that proves to you that fentanyl and opioid crisis was never the crux of this. So understanding that economic coercion is at the crux of what Donald Trump wants, and that is why the 51st state piece has become so important and so relevant to the way that not only he is communicating, but now many of his deputies are communicating about it. And I think really getting a solid messaging to stand back against that is important. We haven't seen our European leaders stand up for us. We've seen the Brits really falter, both from Buckingham Palace. I think that response was weak. Keir Starmer's response was weak. And I think that we haven't really been able to coalesce European leaders around how important this is for not only Canada, but for Western democracies. And so from a messaging standpoint, I think Canada has to make this much more of an issue, and not just within Canada, but around the world. And I think that that's hopefully something that will trigger our European partners to support us.
But Gary, how difficult is that when you consider they're dealing with their own issues, right? Like, they are trying now to rearm, as Ursula von der Leyen had said they need to do. Not to say that they don't care about Canada, but certainly we're not their top priority right now in standing up to Donald Trump. So how do you make sure, as a country, as Canada should, to rally your allies and get them to surround you when they're kind of scurrying on their own?
Yeah, and I don't think we should expect Keir Starmer to come out guns a-blazing and saying, what are you doing about Canada? He's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. It has its own interests and own national interests from an economic standpoint that could be a threat. We saw this when we think about when Prime Minister Trudeau came out and the House of Commons made the allegations against India. The government of Canada and the Prime Minister said, gee, let's see where, Rishi Sunak, the Conservative Prime Minister at the time, and Joe Biden will do. And they looked behind them and they said, wait a second, they're nowhere behind us, because it wasn't in their national interest to pursue a defense of Canada. And I think that's the reality that we all have to wake up to. Yes, we have friends and allies in Europe. Yes, we have friends and allies around the world who want Canadian goods, who want us to ship stuff and be economic partners with them. But it's also in their national interest to have those relationships. It's not just standing up for Canada because we're good guys and we're part of the relationship. I think we have to recognize that countries have their own national interests, and we have to be very clear about what our national interests and what our values are in standing up for ourselves, which is why an economic platform of building things, getting things to market, doing it quickly. The government has done none of these things, partially because Parliament has been shuttered over these last few weeks, but it has been so focused on responding to Trump that it has had no ability to get and do some of these things that are essential for nation building.
Gertrude, last word to you, and a brief one, because we've got about less than a minute left, but how much do you think that this is proof now that a number of countries are sort of turning inwards, and that Canada needs to do that as well as we go forward. And not to say that we can't continue to have free trade agreements with everybody else, but really focusing more on that internal trade and making sure that we're looking in our own backyard, because that's what seems like everybody else is doing.
I think the motto that then views the forward of build Canadian and buy Canadian is important. I think this demonstrates very clearly that we need to ensure that we're investing in Canada. We have a policy that maintains our economic sovereignty. But I also think there's great opportunities right now to build a strong relationship with our other allies in the Commonwealth, across the pond, across the board. If America's not being the partner they should be, we can turn internally and to our other friends to ensure that we are economically strong and viable.
Okay, we're going to put a pause on that one for right now.